One of Denver Mayor Mike Johnson's biggest promises is running headlong into reality, and reality won today. The city swept a large street encampment, but did not offer the people living there other shelter. The city says they're just out of room. The Johnson administration says this is the first time in 6 months it has swept an encampment without offering people hotel shelter or a micro-community bed. The people living on the streets near West 9th and Navajo Street are now on their own. The city says that's because the space in the shelters is too limited. More than 1,000 people have been moved into the shelter since Johnson's homeless initiative started last year, but the majority are still there. They have not moved on to the next step. Mayor's office says transitioning people into permanent housing is taking anywhere from 6 months to a year. And until those initial units are freed up, the city says it will be sweeping encampments that it deems to be a public safety issue.
I asked the police when they started this, where would you like us to go? Like, if you could just designate us a spot, we would go there. And they had no answers for me. And so we're just transferring from community to community, terrorizing the place because we don't have anywhere safe we can just go.
This return to the model of kind of chasing people from street corner to street corner, that was the Hancock administration model that was roundly criticized by mayoral candidates last year, including Johnson, who is now mayor himself. The city says that what it is able to do is point people to the traditional group shelter system, think your traditional homeless shelters, where they said that there were at least 200 beds available as of yesterday. Simultaneously, Denver's trying to convince citizens that it can cut nearly $90 million to pay for migrant services without noticeable pain. Today, the mayor's office took the plan to city council, which has been openly skeptical of how the Johnson administration is paying for its top priorities. Here's Mark Salinger with that.
All right. Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, April 16th. This is the Finance and Governance Committee.
In a meeting that rarely draws a crowd, this one was a sellout.
It is a veritable who's who in the city of Denver in here right now.
The police chief, sheriff, and directors from nearly every department in Denver, all together in one room to see how city council will react to the budget cuts proposed by the mayor.
I would say the $89.9 million is a budget.
The city will cut nearly $90 million to pay for the migrant services. Now we're finding out where that money is coming from and what the city is doing away with. When it comes to cash, the highest amounts come from public safety. Denver Police is cutting nearly $8.5 million. Denver Fire is losing nearly $2.5 million. And the sheriff's office is taking a nearly $4 million cut. But even those amounts make up a very small percentage of their annual budgets.
You've talked a lot about what this isn't going to affect. It's not going to affect this. It's not going to affect that. What is it going to affect? Because it's got to affect something.
We really try to mitigate some of the direct impacts to direct services.
The Department of Transportation and Infrastructure is also losing more than $5 million. That's separate from the nearly $6 million the city is cutting from capital improvement projects. Things like redoing an aging underpass on Alameda or some traffic signal maintenance around the city.
I don't think it is fair to our residents that we are reducing their services to them when there is an opportunity for us to be doing better at making up some of those dollars in other ways, and we're not.
As Denver cuts money, some council members want to see Denver try and make more money. How are traffic tickets looking? What about car registration fees? Nothing is off the table as the city searches for cash.
So let's talk about who didn't have to make a budget cut. The elected clerk and reporter Paul Lopez told us several months ago that he was not willing to make budget cuts, even though he was asked to do so at the time. His office was spared. The district attorney's office, also independently elected, they told us months ago that they were willing to cut their budgets, but also ended up being spared, Kyle.
All of the couch cushions are being checked.
Yes, exactly. Denver is looking for cash everywhere. Let's go for some examples that are a little bit more creative. For example, Denver police patrols the airport. Now the airport is paying for one of the recruit classes to go through and get more police officers. I'm also told that some people that work for the city are losing their Zoom memberships. I guess the city had too many Zoom memberships. So you talk about cutting Zoom memberships. That's small amount.
You have to pay for Zoom? I've
Some
never
people
paid for
do,
Zoom. Well, lucky them.
You
All
don't
right.
have the professional one.
I guess I don't work for the city of Denver. All right,
Something
Mark,
like that.
thank you. A year after a Denver public schools whistleblower on this program sent the district scrambling to explain its safety and security policies, another whistleblower has emerged. A top former communications employee who says that the DPS superintendent has quietly taken steps to keep information from the public and from the school board, the superintendent's bosses. Will Jones served as the executive director of communications for DPS for 9 years, until February. At a school board meeting last night, he claimed that this man, Superintendent Alex Marrero, is mandating that district employees sign non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality agreements. Jones told our partners at the Denver Gazette that he refused to sign an agreement prohibiting him from talking about what went on in the district for 3 years after his employment. Jones says the district withheld his severance package as a result. According to Jones, the former top communications guy, the superintendent also insisted that district staffers withhold information from school board members.
In fact, your employee came to my office one day and told me if board members come to me with questions, not to answer them, to politely refer them to him, and he would do the responding.
This is not the first time that DPS has faced scrutiny over transparency issues. Last year, the district fired a school administrator after he raised school safety concerns about kids charged with violent crimes, including attempted murder, being placed back in classrooms. A district spokesperson acknowledged that the non-disclosure agreements for the communications team in DPS are new. They were presented to them earlier this year. The district describes them as a way to remind staffers of privacy laws. The Republican primary to replace outgoing Congressman Doug Lamborn is going to be a two-way race, and that benefits State Chair of the GOP, Dave Williams. So we know that State Senator Bob Gardner's missed that ballot now. Secretary of State's office says he was 175 signatures short of what he needed. Gardner tells us he's not going to challenge that. He's just going to leave the race. So that leaves two Republicans standing in that heavily Republican district. There is political activist and podcast host Jeff Crank, and the top name on the ballot, GOP Chair Dave Williams, who has used the party apparatus to benefit his campaign. Williams won the majority of the delegate vote at this party's assembly. Both candidates have tried and failed to win that seat in the past. Federal transportation dollars, $35 million worth, are reconnecting some of Denver's most neglected neighborhoods, generations after Globeville, El Rio, Swansea were split apart by I-70 and by rail lines. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg came to Denver to tour that project today. It's building pedestrian bridges and safer railroad crossings in those neighborhoods, trying to mend some of the harm done to those communities by past government decisions. That's where I began tonight's next conversation with Secretary Buttigieg. So, part of the project that you are celebrating here today is about undoing past damage that was done to neighborhoods, specifically the way that communities of color were intersected by interstates. That was celebrated as progress at the time. Do you ever give any thought to what we might be doing today in the name of progress when it comes to transportation infrastructure that our kids and grandkids aren't going to look back on well?
Well, that's why we're so focused on making sure that we not only don't repeat the mistakes of the past, but also mend what has been broken in the past. Neighborhoods like Globeville and Elyria, Swansea, characteristically of minority neighborhoods in the country, were impacted severely by past decisions about where highways went, where railways went, and they were left out of investments in the past. There's a chance to change that, and the reason we're bringing $35 million to this project is we see how intentional the project sponsors are about making sure that this benefits, not displaces, the people who have been here for generations.
When we think about things like ever-widening highways and that kind of thing, do you look at it with an eye to not just what do people today want, but what will future generations think of the decisions we make?
Yeah, part of our focus is to make sure that we don't just pave our way out of every problem. Look, sometimes you really do need more highway capacity. That's certainly the case on I-70 and a lot of these high-growth areas in the West. But often what you really see is a lack of network connectivity, and if you add better streetscape designs, more transit options, active transportation like the greenways and bikeways that we're adding here, that can actually help with congestion just as much or more than just adding more lanes. We're trying to be holistic about this, look at the big picture and get it right, because we're definitely still living with some of the assumptions that were made in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that sometimes trapped people into a car orientation that actually takes away more options than it provides.
When our conversation continues, I'll ask Secretary Buttigieg whether the Biden administration's electric vehicle goals are unrealistic outside the wealthiest areas. And we'll also talk about those I-70 express lanes that are only open when you don't need them.
A week doesn't go by when I don't get a call from a parent or a child who has experienced some type of anti-Semitism.
Colorado's Jewish community is desperately trying to get everyone's attention about a sharp rise in anti-Semitism here. That's next. One of the most commonly asked next questions in our inbox is about the I-70 express lanes, the ones that were built onto the shoulders and are only open part-time. It's federal regulations that specify that they can only be open a certain number of days a year. I brought that up with Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg today, along with the idea of induced demand, the thought that if you open up new permanent lanes, they bring out more drivers and they don't actually reduce traffic. So this is kind of in the weeds to discuss with the Cabinet Secretary, but you dig the details. Let's talk about induced demand. Let's talk about I-70. So part of that picture here in Colorado is that we have part-time shoulder lanes, right? They're only open during peak periods on the shoulder. The Federal Highway Administration requires that they be closed most of the time so that they're a safe pull-off for vehicles. What would you tell folks about that trade-off? They find it frustrating, right, that the lanes aren't open all the time. And what would happen if we just allowed it to be a permanent lane on I-70 all the time?
Look, we're always trying to balance different needs, including throughput and efficiency, but also safety. And we have seen cases where adding lanes just added that much more demand and that much more congestion. We see other cases, including parts of I-70, where there needs to be more capacity. But we really seek to be thoughtful about that in partnership with the states. We don't dictate the solutions from Washington. We work with places like Colorado's DOT, which has been very thoughtful, I think, about many of these questions to try to craft a solution that's right for each individual state.
Let's talk about electric vehicles. Colorado's fifth in the nation for EV sales. Just recently, the Biden administration scaled back pretty dramatically its goals for EV adoptions by 2030. Is that a recognition that folks in lower income neighborhoods like this are not going to be able to afford EVs as they are currently made anytime soon?
Well, we believe that the best thing we can do around EVs is to make them more affordable, which the Inflation Reduction Act does, and make sure charging is more accessible. Colorado is an excellent place for EV adoption because a lot of people are driving longer distances. They'll save more with an EV, provided it's affordable in the first place. So we're going to continue focusing on that. We're partnering with Colorado on getting those chargers out, and we're completely committed to the president's goal that we have 500,000 chargers out by the end of this decade. And we think we can get to about half of all new car sales being EVs by the end of this decade, too. Growth is continuing. Every year there's more EV demand than the past. We've got to make sure that it's fast enough to help us beat climate change, and just as importantly, that it's a made-in-America EV revolution, creating jobs around the U.S., including in the industrial Midwest where I grew up.
My full next conversation with Secretary Buttigieg and today's gale force winds is on the next YouTube channel. There, we also talk about criticism from President Biden's former chief of staff that Biden spends too much time these days talking about infrastructure like bridges, and he's losing sight of issues that matter more to Americans.
A windy, cooler Tuesday as our latest spring storm moves out, leaving us with clear skies and lighter winds and some beneficial moisture from that overnight and early morning rain. Quarter of an inch, almost a half an inch of rain from that storm. Up in the high country, the travel much improved. The winter weather and travel advisories have canceled out after 8 to 18 inches of snow from Copper Mountain through Loveland down to the Winter Park area. Really amazing. Comfortable temperatures today, not as warm as we've enjoyed. These numbers will go up tomorrow. A mild, dry Wednesday ahead of the next storm and round of rain and snow. The wind has really been something. Some of the peak gusts, 55 to 65 miles per hour today from DIA out to Sterling. Thankfully, those winds are easing in the city, but still going pretty good out on the far eastern plains. And we'll start to see after sunset, those winds really start to let up. High wind warning has been scaled back. Red flag warning to the south will be reinstated for tomorrow. Spring storm on the way out. Precipitation kind of coming to an end. It'll be a cool night coming up tonight with temperatures slowly sliding into the 40s. We do have a warmer day tomorrow, a break between the next storm system, which will bring rain and snow Thursday into Friday, and the second storm system, which brings rain and snow Friday into Saturday morning. We're back to 60s and 70s, though, and sunshine late in the weekend.
I've been a rabbi for 38 years, and this has been a part of what we've always known.
But part of it, Colorado's Jewish community says, is also that we are seeing a level of anti-Semitism unlike anything in the last generation. That's next. Anti-Semitism in Colorado is hitting record levels not recorded in the 45 years since the Anti-Defamation League started officially tracking incidents. Our Angela McCall spoke with a rabbi who says he didn't need to see this new report to know what's going on.
Synagogues across the country, the hate towards congregations is getting more intense.
The number and the seriousness and the intensity of some of the anti-Semitic rhetoric and experiences that we've had have gone way up. So we've seen that.
Rabbi Black at Temple Emmanuel doesn't need to see a report to know that he and his community have been targeted more this year than in the past 4 decades.
He says this report is a confirmation of what we already knew.
That report, released Tuesday from the Anti-Defamation League, shows across the country a 140% increase in anti-Semitic incidents since 2022. And in the mountain region, even higher, 199%.
What is alarming is how the impact of October 7th has changed the climate, both in terms of the safety and security that I think members of the Jewish community are feeling.
198 reports in 2023 alone in the state of Colorado.
Incidents in Colorado are currently outpacing what we're seeing at the national level. And it's unfortunate, but all across the country, we're just seeing more and more anti-Semitic incidents.
Scott Levin with ADL says most incidents include harassment, followed by vandalism. 3 assaults were also reported.
It's not just a number or a statistic to us. It's actual people with actual stories and impact on them.
The impact means congregations like Temple Emmanuel have additional security measures like cameras and guards as hate has increased.
For example, at every service now, we have to tell people where the exits are. And we have to tell people what our security protocols are. I've never had to do that in my rabbinate until the past 6 years.
Statistics that leave a lasting impact on the people whose stories are behind the data.
It does take a toll on all of us.
Rabbi Black says he saw an increase not just this year, but really over the past 7 years, particularly after the shooting that took place at a Pittsburgh synagogue in 2018. Also something to note as part of this report, even before October 7th, when the conflict in Israel began, anti-Semitic incidents were already at a record high by October 6th, meaning there was already an increase in hateful rhetoric before that conflict started.
I'm curious, Angela, how do they go about distinguishing between legitimate criticism of the actions of the state of Israel and what they deem to be anti-Semitic?
Right. The ADL actually addressed this. They said, so for instance, when someone speaks out in a critical manner against Israel, for instance, that would not be considered anti-Semitic, but for instance, like questioning the validity of the state of Israel would be considered anti-Semitic. And so they use that different bar there. But for instance, if you're going to rally, they said that is not inherently anti-Semitic.
All right. Angeline, thank you. Back with a provocative and interesting piece to your feedback next. Dorothy in Parachute writes that Denver's budget crisis over the migrant influx is actually the goal of Texas's Republican Governor Greg Abbott, who has bused thousands of migrants to this city. Dorothy writes, the ultimate goal is to break the budget, make Coloradans angry, create chaos, and win elections. It's interesting, Dorothy, because both Governor Abbott and Denver's mayor share the objective that cities should share the cost of America's migrant crisis. How they're going about it is very different. Obviously, Abbott is trying to put the pain on people that he believes are responsible for the draw. We'll continue to talk about this here on Next. See you next time.